The morning sun broke through the dense Tennessee clouds, casting long shadows across the Carmichael farm. William Carmichael, a man whose weathered hands told stories of 5 decades working the same soil his grandfather had cultivated, stood at the edge of his cornfield. At 58, his tall frame was slightly bent from years of labor, but his eyes still held the determination of someone who refused to give up. The corn stalks swayed gently in the October breeze, their golden leaves rustling with a sound that had once brought Will comfort. Now, that same sound felt like a countdown. The drought had been merciless this year, turning what should have been a bountiful harvest into barely enough to break even. But that wasn't the worst of it. "Will, breakfast is ready," Rebecca's voice carried from the farmhouse, a white 2-story structure that had stood since 1947. Despite her illness, she insisted on maintaining their routines. Will turned toward the house, wiping his forehead with a faded bandana. The walk back felt longer than usual, each step heavy with the knowledge of what waited for him in the kitchen. Bills, notices, and that one letter he'd been avoiding for 3 days. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and bacon. Rebecca sat at the table, her thin frame wrapped in a wool cardigan despite the relatively mild morning. Her auburn hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked up at him with those green eyes that had captured his heart 40 years ago, and he saw the worry she tried to hide. "You didn't sleep again," she said softly, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Will poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "Had some things on my mind." "The letter?" He nodded, reaching for the envelope that had been sitting unopened on the counter. The return address made his stomach turn. Greenfield Regional Bank. He'd been dealing with local banks his entire life, but this wasn't about a regular loan. This was about a debt he'd thought was settled 15 years ago. Rebecca reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm despite her illness. "Whatever it says, we'll figure it out together." Will opened the envelope slowly, his calloused fingers struggling with the paper. As he read, his face went pale. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They're saying I owe $127,000 from a consolidated agricultural loan from 2010. They claim there was an administrative error and it was never properly discharged." His voice was barely above a whisper. "They want full payment in 90 days or they'll proceed with foreclosure." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. "But that's impossible." "We made every payment. You have the records. The records show the main loan was paid. But this is something different. Something about a secondary lien that was supposed to be forgiven, but wasn't processed correctly." Will's hand shook as he held the letter. "Beck, I don't have that kind of money. Between the drought, your medical bills, and just keeping this place running." The sound of a truck pulling into the driveway interrupted them. Through the window, they saw their daughter Emily stepping out of her red pickup. At 28, she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She taught 4th grade at Meadowbrook Elementary, 30 miles away, but she made the drive to the farm every Friday to check on them. Emily walked in with her usual bright smile, carrying a canvas bag full of groceries. "Morning. I brought some things from the farmer's market and—" She stopped mid-sentence, seeing their faces. "What's wrong?" Will handed her the letter, without a word. Emily read it quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to anger. "This is ridiculous. Dad, you paid that loan off years ago. I remember the celebration dinner we had." "That's what I thought too, sweetheart. But apparently, there was some paperwork that didn't get filed right, and now they're coming after us." Emily pulled out a chair and sat down hard. Okay, let's think about this logically. You have 90 days. We can fight this, right? Get a lawyer? With what money, Em? Will's voice cracked. I can barely afford the fertilizer for next season. Your mother's medication alone costs us $800 a month even with insurance. A lawyer to fight the bank? That could cost tens of thousands. And we might still lose. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Rebecca got up slowly, her movements careful, and refilled everyone's coffee cups. It was a small gesture, but it was her way of holding on to normalcy when everything felt like it was crumbling. Emily's mind was racing. What about the farm equipment? Could we sell some of it? Will shook his head. It's all old, Em. The tractor's from 1998. I've kept it running with duct tape and prayers. Nobody's going to pay enough for any of it to make a dent in what we owe. The land itself? If I sell pieces of it, we won't have enough acreage to make the farm viable. And who's buying farmland around here anyway? Everyone's in the same boat, struggling to keep their heads above water. Emily stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fields that had been her playground as a child. She remembered running through the corn rows, helping her father with the harvest, learning to drive the tractor when she was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. This farm wasn't just property. It was their family's legacy, their identity, their home. There has to be something we can do, she said, her voice determined. We're not losing this place. Not like this. Later that afternoon, Will drove his old Ford pickup into town. Greenfield, Tennessee, population 4,200, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Main Street was lined with brick buildings from the early 1900s, most of them now housing small businesses that struggled to compete with the Walmart 30 miles away. Will parked in front of Greenfield Regional Bank, an imposing stone building that had once been the town's pride. Now it seemed to loom over him like a judge passing sentence. Inside, the air conditioning was too cold, and the fluorescent lights too bright. The bank smelled of air freshener and old carpet. Will approached the reception desk, where a young woman he didn't recognize greeted him with a professional smile. I need to speak with someone about a loan issue, he said, handing her the letter. One moment, please. She picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it. Mr. Dalton will see you. Second door on the right. Andrew Dalton was a man in his mid-40s, with neat hair, an expensive suit, and the kind of smooth manner that came from years of telling people things they didn't want to hear. He stood as Will entered, extending his hand. Mr. Carmichael, please have a seat. I've been expecting you might come in. Will shook his hand briefly and sat down. Mr. Dalton, there's been some kind of mistake with this loan. I paid off my agricultural debt in 2010. Dalton nodded sympathetically, pulling up something on his computer. I understand your confusion, Mr. Carmichael. The issue is that while the primary loan was indeed paid off, there was a secondary lien attached to the property that was part of a consolidated agricultural relief package. Due to an administrative error at the federal level, that particular lien was never properly discharged. But I wasn't told about any secondary lien. I made every payment that was asked of me. I believe you, Mr. Carmichael. Unfortunately, the error wasn't caught until a recent audit. The bank is obligated to collect on the outstanding debt. I wish I had better news. Will leaned forward. Mr. Dalton, I'm asking you, human being to human being, to give me some time to figure this out. That farm has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built that house with his own hands. Dalton's expression softened slightly, but his words remained firm. I understand the emotional attachment, Mr. Carmichael. I truly do. But the bank has its own obligations. I can give you the full 90 days, and I'd encourage you to seek legal counsel. But beyond that, my hands are tied. If the debt isn't paid, or a satisfactory payment plan isn't arranged, we'll have to move forward with foreclosure proceedings. Will stood up slowly. You know what's funny, Mr. Dalton? I've never missed a payment on anything in my life. Not once. I've worked that land every single day since I was 14 years old. And now, because of somebody's paperwork mistake, I'm going to lose everything. Mr. Carmichael, no, let me finish. My wife is sick. She needs treatments that cost more than we can afford. But we manage because that's what you do. You manage. My daughter is a teacher, helping to educate your kids, your community's future. And my farm? It feeds people. That's what I do. I feed people. But none of that matters because of a computer error somewhere. Dalton remained silent, unable to meet Will's eyes. 90 days, Will said quietly. I'll figure something out. I always do. He walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun, feeling older than he had that morning. The town square was busy with people going about their daily lives, unaware that his world was falling apart. He sat in his truck for a long moment before starting the engine, wondering how he was going to tell Rebecca that there was no easy way out of this. That evening, Emily made dinner while Rebecca rested upstairs. Will sat at the kitchen table surrounded by folders of old documents, receipts, and loan papers. He'd been through them all a dozen times, hoping to find something that would prove the bank was wrong. But the paperwork was confusing, and his head ached from trying to make sense of it all. Dad, you need to eat something, Emily said, placing a plate in front of him. I'm not hungry. I don't care. Eat. Her tone was firm, the same one she probably used with her fourth graders when they were being stubborn. Will picked up his fork mechanically and took a bite. Emily sat across from him, her laptop open. I've been researching, she said. There are legal aid services that help farmers with loan disputes. I've already sent emails to 3 different organizations. And I've started a GoFundMe page. I know you're going to hate the idea, but pride isn't going to save this farm. We need help, and there's no shame in asking for it. Will looked at his daughter, seeing the determination in her face. You wrote about our situation on the internet? I wrote about a hard-working man who's dedicated his life to his land and his family, and who's being crushed by a bureaucratic error. People respond to honest stories, Dad, and this is an honest story. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's a community coming together to help one of their own. Remember when the Pattersons' barn burned down 5 years ago? You were the first one there, helping rebuild it. You donated lumber, time, and equipment. Was that charity? That was different. No, it wasn't. That was neighbors helping neighbors. That's what we do in places like this. Will rubbed his eyes tiredly. How much do you think you can raise with this GoFundMe thing? Emily hesitated. I honestly don't know. Maybe a few $1,000s? Every bit helps, right? It's better than nothing. We need $127,000, Em. A few thousand isn't going to make a difference. Maybe not on its own, but it's a start. And I'm not stopping there. I'm going to talk to Pastor Reynolds about announcing it at church. I'm going to contact the local newspaper. I'm going to call every farmers association in the state if I have to. This isn't over, Dad. Not by a long shot. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe. She's right, Will. We're not giving up. We're going to fight this with everything we have. Will looked at the 2 most important women in his life. One who'd stood by him through 40 years of marriage, and one who'd inherited his stubborn refusal to quit. Despite the crushing weight of the situation, he felt a small spark of hope. All right, he said quietly. We fight. Emily smiled and pulled out her phone. I'm going to take some photos of the farm for the GoFundMe page. The sun's setting, and the light will be perfect. People need to see what we're trying to save. As she headed outside, Will pulled Rebecca close. They stood together in the kitchen, holding on to each other, and the slim hope that somehow, some way, they'd find a miracle in the next 90 days. The next morning, Emily's GoFundMe page had been shared 47 times and raised $1,240. It was far from what they needed, but seeing those donations, $20 from the Martinez family, $50 from their former neighbor Jack Peterson, $100 from Anonymous, made Will realize he wasn't as alone as he'd felt in the bank yesterday. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, reading the comments people had left with their donations. "Listen to this one," she said, her voice emotional. "The Carmichael farm has been a landmark in our community for as long as I can remember. Losing it would be like losing a piece of our heritage. Praying for you all." That's from Helen Wixworth. You know, the lady who runs the flower shop on Main Street. Will poured coffee and looked over her shoulder. More comments kept appearing as they watched. Former students of Emily's, people they'd done business with over the years, friends from church. They were all showing their support. His phone rang. It was Charles Mackenzie, a fellow farmer whose land bordered theirs to the south. "Will, I just saw Emily's post. This is some serious trouble you're in." "Yeah, Charlie, it's not good. Listen, some of us farmers are getting together at the community center tonight. We want to talk about what we can do to help. 6 o'clock. You'll be there?" "Charlie, I appreciate it, but no buts. 6 o'clock. We take care of our own around here." The line went dead before Will could protest further. That afternoon, Emily drove to the Greenfield Gazette office. The newspaper had been running since 1892, though these days it was down to a skeleton crew. The editor, Robert Chen, was a transplant from Nashville who'd fallen in love with small-town life and decided to stay after covering a story about the town's sesquicentennial celebration. "Emily Carmichael," Robert said, looking up from his desk cluttered with papers and coffee cups. "I heard you're fighting to save your family farm. Have a seat." Emily sat down, grateful he'd agreed to meet with her. "Mr. Chen, my father is one of the most honest, hard-working men you'll ever meet. He's never asked anyone for anything. But right now, he's facing something he can't handle alone." Robert leaned back in his chair, his pen poised over his notepad. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Emily laid out the whole story. The original loan, the supposed administrative error, the impossible deadline, and the bank's refusal to work with them. Robert listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. "This is exactly the kind of story that matters," he said when she finished. "It's not just about your farm. It's about how small farmers are being squeezed out of existence by bureaucratic nightmares and corporate banking systems that don't care about the human cost of their policies. Can you write about it? I can do better than that. This is going to be a front-page story. I'll talk to some of my contacts at larger papers, too. This kind of thing, it resonates with people. The little guy fighting against the system, trying to save his family legacy. It's a story that needs to be told." Emily felt tears welling up. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." "Actually, I do. My grandfather lost his family restaurant to a similar situation when I was a kid. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong set of circumstances. I watched what it did to him. If I can help prevent that from happening to your father, then I'm doing my job right." At 6 o'clock, the Greenfield Community Center was packed. Will was shocked to see at least 60 people there. Farmers, business owners, teachers, retired folks, and even some teenagers from the local FFA chapter. Long folding tables were set up with coffee and cookies that various people had brought. Charlie Mackenzie stood at the front of the room, calling everyone to attention. "All right, folks, let's get started. Most of you know why we're here. Will Carmichael is facing a situation that could happen to any of us. The bank made a mistake 15 years ago, and now they're trying to make Will pay for it. We're here to figure out how we can help. Janet Foster, who owned the local diner, stood up. I've already started a donation jar at the restaurant. Every customer who's come in today has heard about this, and we've raised almost $400 so far. That's wonderful, Janet, Charlie said. Anyone else? David Park, who ran the hardware store, spoke up. I've contacted the Tennessee Farm Bureau. They're sending a lawyer to meet with Will next week pro bono to review the case. They can't promise anything, but at least we'll know if there's a legal angle to fight this. More people spoke up, each offering what they could. The high school was planning a fundraising bake sale. The local churches were taking up special collections. The VFW Post was organizing a benefit dinner and auction. The list went on and on. Will sat in the back, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Rebecca squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. Emily stood up to thank everyone, but her voice broke with emotion. An older man in the back stood up. It was George Hammond, a Vietnam veteran who'd known Will's grandfather. I've got something to say, George announced, his voice gravelly but strong. Some folks here might not know the history of the Carmichael farm. So let me educate you a bit. He walked to the front of the room. When I came back from Vietnam in 1971, I was a mess. PTSD, they call it now. Back then, we just called it being broken. I couldn't hold down a job, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. Will's grandfather, Henry Carmichael, gave me work on his farm. Didn't ask questions, didn't judge me. Just put a tool in my hand and showed me what needed doing. George's voice grew thick with emotion. That man saved my life. He taught me that honest work and being part of something bigger than yourself could heal wounds nobody could see. When Henry passed, young Will here couldn't have been more than 25. He kept me on, treated me with the same respect his grandfather did. He turned to face Will. The Carmichael family doesn't just farm that land. They've been a pillar of this community for 3 generations. They've given jobs, donated food to the food bank, sponsored little league teams, and been there for anyone who needed help. Now they need us, and I'll be damned if we let them down. The room erupted in applause. Will stood up, his voice shaking. I don't know what to say. Thank you. All of you. This means more than you know. Charlie Mackenzie stepped forward. We're not done yet, Will. We've got 90 days to raise $127,000. That's roughly $1,400 a day. It's going to take everything we've got, but this community doesn't quit. We're going to save your farm. The following week brought a whirlwind of activity. The Greenfield Gazette published Robert Chen's article, A Farmer's Fight: The Carmichael Family versus Corporate Banking. Pete. The story was picked up by several regional papers and even got a mention on a Nashville news station. The GoFundMe page exploded. What had started at just over $1,000 suddenly jumped to $15,000, then $25,000. Donations came from all over Tennessee, and even from other states. People who'd never met the Carmichaels but were moved by their story. Emily took a leave of absence from teaching to coordinate the fundraising efforts full-time. She created a Facebook page, started a YouTube channel where she documented their journey, and organized a massive community yard sale where people donated items to be sold, with all proceeds going to the fund. The benefit dinner at the VFW Post drew over 200 people. Local musicians donated their time to perform, and the auction of donated items, everything from handmade quilts to a weekend getaway at a local cabin, raised another $8,000. Rebecca, despite her illness, insisted on participating. She organized a baking marathon with the church ladies, selling pies, cookies, and cakes at the farmer's market every Saturday. Her famous apple pie alone brought in nearly $500. But even with all these efforts, by the end of the third week, they'd only raised $47,000. It was an incredible amount, more than Will had ever dreamed possible, but it was still less than half of what they needed. And time was running out. Will met with the lawyer from the Tennessee Farm Bureau, a sharp woman named Patricia Hughes. She reviewed all the documents thoroughly. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Carmichael," she said after hours of review. "Legally, the bank is in the right. The lien was legitimate, and the fact that it wasn't properly discharged is unfortunately your responsibility, not theirs. We could file appeals, try to slow down the process, but ultimately, without the full payment, you're going to lose this case." Will felt his heart sink. "So there's nothing we can do?" "I didn't say that. There are hardship provisions, but they typically require proof that paying the debt would cause undue suffering. Given your wife's medical condition and your age, we might be able to negotiate a payment plan or a reduced settlement. I'll reach out to the bank and see what they're willing to discuss." It was better than nothing, but not by much. On a cold November evening, Emily sat in the farmhouse living room, staring at her laptop. The GoFundMe page had stalled at $52,000. She'd posted updates, shared stories, done everything she could think of. But the momentum had slowed. People had been incredibly generous, but there was only so much a small community could give. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Rachel Morrison. "Just saw something on Twitter. A tweet about your dad's story is going viral. Check it out." Emily quickly opened Twitter. Someone had shared the Greenfield Gazette article along with photos from Emily's Facebook page. The tweet had thousands of likes and retweets, and it was still climbing. "Tennessee farmer faces losing family land due to bank error. Community rallies, but needs help reaching $127K goal. Real people. Real struggles. Save the Carmichael farm." The comments were pouring in. People from California, New York, Texas, from all over the country, were reading their story and sharing it. Emily watched in amazement as the GoFundMe donations started coming in faster than before. $5 and $10 at a time. But so many of them that the numbers were climbing visibly. $53,000, $54,000, $55,000. She called her parents into the living room. "You need to see this." They gathered around the laptop, watching as their story spread across social media. Local news stations were now picking it up. A reporter from Nashville called Emily's cell phone, asking if they could come to the farm to do an interview. "This is incredible," Rebecca whispered. But even as they watched the support grow, Will remained cautiously hopeful. They were still so far from their goal, and the deadline was approaching faster than he wanted to admit. $58,000, $60,000, $63,000. "We're getting there," Emily said, her voice full of determination. "We're really getting there." The morning of December 5th started like any other. Will was up before dawn, checking on the livestock and repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by the previous night's storm. The temperature had dropped significantly, and frost covered everything in a delicate white coating that glittered in the early morning light. Rebecca was having a good day, which meant she was able to help Emily prepare breakfast without needing to rest every few minutes. They worked together in the comfortable silence of people who'd shared a kitchen for decades, the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits filling the house. The GoFundMe page had reached $71,000. It was more money than Will had ever imagined they could raise, but they still needed $56,000 more, and they only had 2 weeks left. Patricia Hughes, the lawyer, had managed to get the bank to agree to a meeting to discuss payment plans, but Andrew Dalton had made it clear that they preferred full payment. Emily's phone rang as they sat down to eat. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Unknown number from Nashville. Probably another reporter, Will said. You can call them back later. But Emily answered anyway. Hello? This is Emily Carmichael. Her expression changed as she listened, her eyes growing wide. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? You're calling from… What? Are you serious? Will and Rebecca exchanged glances as Emily stood up and walked to the window, still listening intently. Yes, of course. Today? This afternoon? Yes, absolutely. We'll be here. Thank you so much for calling. She hung up and stood perfectly still for a moment, her hand over her mouth. Em? What's wrong? Rebecca asked, concerned. Emily turned to face them, and there were tears in her eyes. That was someone from Reba McEntire's management team. The singer? Will asked, confused. Yes. Apparently, someone on her team saw our story on social media. Reba is doing a benefit concert in Nashville tonight for children's hospitals, and she's going to be in the area this afternoon. She wants to visit the farm. She wants to meet us. The kitchen fell silent. Rebecca's hand went to her chest. Will just stared at his daughter. You're kidding, he finally said. I'm not kidding, Dad. Reba McEntire wants to come here, today, in about 4 hours. The next few hours were a blur of frantic cleaning and preparation. Rebecca insisted on changing into her better dress, despite Emily's protests that it didn't matter. Will put on the clean flannel shirt Emily had given him last Christmas and actually combed his hair. Emily stress cleaned the entire house twice and kept checking the driveway every 5 minutes. What do we even say to someone like that? Will asked, pacing in the living room. What do you say to a celebrity? You talk to her like a person, Dad. That's all. She's just a person. A person who sold 40 million records and won every award there is, Rebecca added, smoothing her dress nervously. At 2:15 p.m., 2 black SUVs pulled into the driveway. Emily's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. The vehicles parked, and several people stepped out, security personnel, and what looked like assistants or managers. And then Reba McEntire stepped out of the second SUV. She was dressed casually in jeans, boots, and a leather jacket, her famous red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked around the farm with genuine interest, taking in the barn, the fields, and the old farmhouse. When her eyes landed on the Carmichael family standing on the front porch, she smiled warmly and walked toward them. You must be the Carmichaels, she said, her Oklahoma accent friendly and down to earth. She extended her hand first to Will. I'm Reba. It's so nice to meet you. Will shook her hand, momentarily speechless. Mr. Carmichael, Will, thank you for having me. This is quite a place you've got here. Thank you for coming, Ms. McEntire. Will finally managed. We're honored. Please, call me Reba, and the honor is mine. I grew up on a ranch in Oklahoma, so farms like this, they hold a special place in my heart. She turned to Rebecca and Emily, greeting them both warmly. One of her assistants, a woman named Jennifer, stepped forward. Reba has about an hour before she needs to head to Nashville for sound check. She wanted to hear your story directly from you and see the farm. They invited Reba inside, and she admired the farmhouse's original features. The hardwood floors Will's grandfather had installed, the stone fireplace, the vintage photographs on the walls showing generations of Carmichaels working the land. This is real history, Reba said, examining a photo from 1952 showing Will's grandfather standing proudly next to his first tractor. This is the kind of thing that should be preserved, not taken away because of some bank's paperwork mistake. They sat in the living room, and Will told their story from the beginning. Reba listened intently, asking questions and showing genuine empathy. When Will talked about his grandfather building the house and teaching him to farm, she nodded with understanding. "My daddy raised cattle and competed in rodeos," she said. "I know what it means to have roots in the land. It's not just property. It's your identity, your family's legacy, who you are." Rebecca served coffee and the apple pie she'd made that morning, apologizing that it wasn't fancy enough for a celebrity. Reba laughed. "Are you kidding? Homemade pie is better than anything at any restaurant. This is perfect." As they talked, Reba's team remained respectfully in the background, though Jennifer occasionally took photos and videos with Reba's permission. Emily explained the fundraising efforts, showing Reba the GoFundMe page and all the community support they'd received. "You've done an amazing job," Reba told Emily. $71,000 raised by a community pulling together. "That's incredible, but you're still short of what you need." "We know," Will said quietly. "We've got 2 weeks left, and I don't see how we're going to make it. The bank wants their money, and we just don't have it. We might lose everything my grandfather built." Reba was quiet for a moment, then stood up. "Would you show me around the farm? I'd love to see it." They walked through the property, with Reba asking about the crops, the livestock, and the daily operations. She listened as Will explained the challenges of modern farming, the rising costs, the unpredictable weather, the corporate consolidation that was swallowing up family farms across the country. "People don't realize where their food comes from," Will said as they stood in the middle of the cornfield. "They go to the grocery store and buy whatever they need, never thinking about the farmers who worked sunup to sundown to grow it. Families like mine, we're disappearing. And when we're gone, who's going to feed people? Big corporations who care more about profits than quality?" Reba nodded. "You're absolutely right. And that's why stories like yours matter. People need to understand what's at stake." They walked to the old barn, where Will showed her the antique farming equipment his grandfather had used. Reba touched the worn handle of a hand plow, clearly moved. "This reminds me of my daddy's ranch," she said softly. "The tools, the hard work, the pride in doing things right. It's a way of life that's worth fighting for." When they returned to the house, Reba pulled Jennifer aside and spoke to her quietly. Jennifer nodded and made a phone call, stepping away for privacy. "Will, Rebecca, Emily," Reba said, turning to face them. "I came here today because your story touched my heart. But now that I've met you and seen this beautiful farm, I know I need to do more than just visit." She paused, and the Carmichaels waited, not daring to hope for what they thought she might be suggesting. "How much did you say you still need to raise?" $56,000, Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. Reba smiled. "Well, I'd like to make a contribution. Jennifer?" Her assistant stepped forward with a tablet. "We can make the donation right now if you provide the GoFundMe information." Emily fumbled with her phone, pulling up the page with shaking hands. Jennifer took the information and typed quickly. Within moments, she turned the tablet to show Reba. "Is this correct? $56,000? "That's correct," Reba confirmed. Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. She looked at the screen, and the color drained from her face. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Mom! Dad! Look!" She turned the phone to show them. The GoFundMe page now showed $127,000 raised of $127,000 goal. Rebecca burst into tears. Will stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Emily just kept staring at the screen as if it might disappear if she looked away. Reba stepped forward and pulled Rebecca into a gentle hug. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. "You're going to keep your home." Will found his voice, though it was thick with emotion. How can we ever thank you? I have no words." "You don't need to thank me," Reba said. "I've been blessed beyond measure in my life. And if I can use those blessings to help good people keep their legacy, then that's what I'm supposed to do. Your story, your dedication to your land and your family, that's worth preserving. Jennifer and the other team members were documenting the moment, capturing the tears, the disbelief, and the overwhelming gratitude. Reba spent another 20 minutes with them, talking about next steps and making sure they knew exactly how to access the funds and work with the bank. You'll still need a good lawyer to make sure everything is handled properly, she advised. I'll have my people connect you with someone who specializes in agricultural law. This donation covers the debt, but you want to make sure the bank doesn't try to pull any other surprises. As she prepared to leave, Reba hugged each of them again. Thank you for sharing your home with me today. What you have here, this is real. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like it's not important. They walked her to the SUV, where she paused before getting in. Oh, and Emily? Keep telling your story. Other families out there are facing similar situations. Maybe you can help them too. As the vehicles pulled away, the Carmichael family stood in the driveway, watching until they disappeared down the road. Then they looked at each other and simultaneously burst into tears and laughter, hugging each other tightly. Did that really just happen? Rebecca asked, laughing and crying at the same time. I think it did, Will said, his voice full of wonder. I think it really did. Emily pulled out her phone and looked at the GoFundMe page again, just to make sure it was real. The number was still there, $127,000. And there, at the top of the recent donations list, was a single entry. Reba McEntire, $56,000. Keep fighting for what you love. The world needs farmers like you. We need to tell everyone, Emily said, already opening her social media apps. We need to thank everyone who helped us, and we need to share what Reba did. Not yet, Will said, stopping her. First, we need to just be here for a minute. The three of us. Let's go inside, sit down, and really understand what just happened. Tomorrow, we'll make calls and tell people. But right now, I just want to be with my family in the home we just saved. They went inside, made fresh coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where they'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many worries over the past few months. But this time, instead of worry, there was hope. Instead of fear, there was gratitude. And instead of facing the loss of everything they'd worked for, they were facing a future on the land they loved. Rebecca raised her coffee cup. To miracles, family, and red-headed angels from Oklahoma. They clinked their cups together, laughing through their tears, knowing that their lives had just been forever changed by an unexpected act of extraordinary kindness. News of Reba McEntire's donation spread faster than wildfire through Greenfield and beyond. By that evening, Emily's phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, friends, and even strangers wanting to hear about their encounter with the country music star. The GoFundMe page's comment section exploded with hundreds of new messages celebrating the news. Robert Chen from the Greenfield Gazette was the first journalist to arrive at the farm the next morning, his camera equipment ready. This is the follow-up story dreams are made of, he said, setting up for photos. Mind if I get some shots of you all on the porch where you met Reba? As Will, Rebecca, and Emily posed for pictures, more cars began arriving. Local news vans from Nashville, Knoxville, and even Memphis pulled into their driveway. The story had captured people's imagination. A struggling farm family saved at the last moment by a celebrity with rural roots who understood their plight. We need to be strategic about this, Emily said during a brief break between interviews. Every media appearance is a chance to talk about the bigger issue. Family farms disappearing across America. Will nodded, understanding his daughter's point. This wasn't just about them anymore. That afternoon, they drove into town to meet with Andrew Dalton at Greenfield Regional Bank. The dynamic had shifted dramatically. Dalton, who had been strictly business during their previous meeting, now seemed almost nervous as he welcomed them into his office. "Mr. and Mrs. Carmichael, Emily," he said, gesturing to chairs. "I've been made aware of the funds raised for your debt. It's quite remarkable." "Remarkable doesn't quite cover it," Will said evenly. "We'd like to settle this debt immediately and get the proper documentation showing the lien is discharged." Patricia Hughes, their lawyer, had joined them for the meeting. She laid out a folder of documents. "We'll need complete written confirmation that all debts associated with the property are cleared, along with an apology letter acknowledging the bank's administrative error that caused this situation." Dalton shifted uncomfortably. "An apology letter?" "Yes," Patricia said firmly. "My clients have been put through tremendous stress due to this error. The least the bank can do is acknowledge its mistake in writing." Over the next hour, they worked through the paperwork. The funds from the GoFundMe account were transferred to pay off the debt in full. Patricia meticulously reviewed every document, ensuring that nothing was missed this time. When they finally walked out of the bank, Will was holding a folder containing documentation that the property was free and clear. He stopped on the sidewalk, looking at the papers as if they might vanish. "It's really over," Rebecca said, taking his hand. "It's really over," he confirmed, pulling her close. The following week, the Carmichaels found themselves thrust into a media whirlwind they never could have imagined. Good Morning America sent a crew to do a remote interview from the farm. Country music radio stations across the nation were talking about Reba's gesture. The story had struck a chord with Americans who were tired of hearing about big corporations crushing the little guy. Here was a story with a happy ending. But it wasn't just about celebrating their good fortune. Emily made sure to use every interview opportunity to talk about the thousands of other farmers facing similar challenges. She connected with agricultural advocacy groups, sharing resources and information about legal aid for farmers in trouble. Charlie McKenzie and other local farmers started a Farmers Helping Farmers Fund, inspired by the community's response to the Carmichaels' situation. "We all know it could be any of us next," Charlie said at the fund's inaugural meeting. "Let's make sure we've got each other's backs." One afternoon, a family from 2 counties over drove to the farm. Keith and Laura Davidson were in their 30s with 2 young kids. Keith's face was haggard with stress. "We're sorry to bother you," Laura said hesitantly. "But we heard your story, and we're in a similar situation. We didn't know where else to turn." Will invited them in immediately. Over coffee, the Davidsons explained their predicament. A predatory loan with interest rates that had ballooned beyond what they could pay, threatening their dairy farm. Emily pulled out her laptop. "Let me connect you with Patricia Hughes. She might be able to help. And we'll see about starting a fundraising campaign for you, too." As the Davidsons left that evening, with tears of gratitude and renewed hope, Rebecca turned to Will. "We're not just saving our farm anymore, are we?" "No," Will agreed. "I think we're part of something bigger now." 2 weeks after Reba's visit, on a cold December evening, the town of Greenfield organized a community celebration. The high school gymnasium was decorated with strings of lights, and nearly the entire town turned out. It was officially billed as a holiday celebration, but everyone knew it was really about celebrating the Carmichaels and the community that had rallied around them. Janet Foster's diner catered the event, refusing payment. "You people have been eating at my restaurant for 3 generations, she said. "This is the least I can do." The mayor, Thomas Bennett, gave a speech about community values and how Greenfield had shown the world what small-town America was really about. George Hammond presented Will with a framed photo of his grandfather standing in front of the original farmhouse in 1947. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," George said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Not just for saving the farm, but for the grace with which you've handled this whole situation." Emily was asked to speak, and she stood at the microphone, looking out at all the familiar faces. "I want to thank every single person who donated, shared our story, baked a pie, organized an event, or just sent positive thoughts our way. What Reba McEntire did was incredible, but she wouldn't have known about us without all of you spreading the word." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "This experience taught me something important. We live in a time when it's easy to feel isolated, to think we have to handle everything alone. But that's not true. We're stronger together. The old saying, 'It takes a village,' isn't just about raising children. It's about everything. It's about showing up for each other when times are tough." The crowd applauded, and Emily continued, "My dad taught me that farming isn't just a job, it's a calling. It's about taking care of the land so it can take care of future generations. But I've learned that building community is a calling too. We need to look out for each other, support each other, and remember that we're all in this together." Later in the evening, as people mingled and shared stories, David Park approached Will. "I've been thinking about what Emily said, about looking out for each other. I've got an idea I want to run by you." He explained his proposal: a cooperative buying group where local farmers could pool their resources to purchase supplies at bulk prices, reducing costs for everyone. Several other farmers gathered around, and soon they were deep in discussion about how to make it work. "This is good," Charlie Mackenzie said. "This is the kind of thing that could actually make a difference." Rebecca watched from across the room, seeing her husband animated and engaged in a way he hadn't been in months. The stress lines in his face had softened, and there was light in his eyes again. Emily joined her mother. "He looks happy. He looks like himself again," Rebecca corrected. "Like the weight of the world isn't crushing him anymore." "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Really?" Rebecca smiled. "Honestly, better than I have in months. I think stress was making my symptoms worse. Now that we're not facing disaster every day, I can focus on actually taking care of myself." The evening ended with impromptu music. Several locals had brought guitars and fiddles, and soon there was dancing. Will, who hadn't danced in years, swept Rebecca onto the floor for a slow song. Emily watched her parents swaying together and felt her heart swell with gratitude. On Christmas morning, the Carmichaels woke up in their farmhouse, secure in the knowledge that it was truly theirs. The previous Christmas had been subdued, overshadowed by Rebecca's illness and mounting financial pressures. This year was different. Emily had stayed over Christmas Eve, and they had a leisurely breakfast together before opening presents. They were modest gifts. They'd never been extravagant people, but they meant something this year in a way they hadn't before. Each present represented a future they'd nearly lost. Will's phone rang around noon. It was an unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Merry Christmas, Will," came a familiar Oklahoma accent. "Reba, is this really you?" "It's really me. I wanted to call and check on you all. How are things going?" Will walked to the window, looking out at his land. "Things are good, really good. We settled with the bank, and the farm is officially ours, free and clear. And it's all thanks to you. It's thanks to a whole lot of people, from what I heard. I just pushed you over the finish line, but I'm so glad it worked out. Are you having a good Christmas?" "The best one in years," Will said honestly. "We have so much to be thankful for." They talked for a few more minutes, with Reba sharing that she'd been following their story and was pleased to see them using their platform to help other farmers. "That's exactly what I was hoping would happen," she said. "One act of kindness can create ripples that go on and on." After they hung up, Will shared the conversation with Rebecca and Emily. They sat together in the living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling, and marveled at how much their lives had changed in just a few weeks. "You know what's funny?" Emily said. "A few months ago, our biggest worry was losing everything. Now, our biggest challenge is figuring out how to help other people who are where we were." "That's a much better problem to have," Rebecca said. Will raised his coffee mug. "To new beginnings, family, and the kindness of strangers who become friends." They clinked their mugs together, the warmth of the fire matching the warmth in their hearts. Outside, snow began to fall softly on the Carmichael farm, covering everything in a blanket of white. It was a new beginning indeed. Spring arrived in Tennessee with an explosion of color and life. The Carmichael farm, which had seemed on the verge of death just months earlier, was now thriving with renewed purpose. Will walked through rows of newly planted corn, feeling a sense of peace he'd thought he might never experience again. The past few months had been transformative in ways he never could have imagined. The farm wasn't just saved. It had become a symbol of hope and community resilience that continued to inspire people far beyond Greenfield. Emily had taken a permanent position coordinating the Farmers Helping Farmers initiative that had grown out of their experience. Working from a small office in town, she helped connect struggling farmers with resources, legal aid, and fundraising support. In just 4 months, they'd helped 7 families avoid foreclosure and had created a network of support that was being replicated in other states. "Dad, you need to see this," Emily called from the porch, where she was working on her laptop. Will climbed the steps, wiping dirt from his hands. "What is it? Remember the Davidson family? The dairy farmers we met?" "Of course. Keith and Laura with the 2 kids. They just sent me this." Emily turned her screen to show a video. In it, Keith Davidson stood in front of his dairy barn, his children beside him. "Thanks to the Carmichael family and the Farmers Helping Farmers Network, we were able to negotiate with our lender and restructure our debt. We're not losing our farm. Our kids will grow up here, just like we did. Thank you for giving us hope when we had none left." Will felt his eyes misting. "That's good. That's real good. It's more than good, Dad. You know how many people have watched this video? Over 50,000. And the comments. People are sharing their own stories, connecting with each other, offering support. What Reba started with us, it's creating this whole movement." Rebecca emerged from the house with a tray of lemonade. Her health had stabilized significantly, and while she still had difficult days, the reduction in stress had made a noticeable difference. Her doctor had even been able to reduce some of her medications. "What are you two conspiring about?" she asked with a smile. "Just watching people's lives get better," Will said, putting his arm around her. "Not bad for a day's work." In May, Reba McEntire's team reached out with an unexpected invitation. She was performing at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville and wanted the Carmichael family to be her guests. More than that, she wanted them on stage during one of her songs to share their story with the Opry audience. "I can't go on stage in front of thousands of people," Will protested when Emily told him about the invitation. "I'm a farmer, not a performer." "You won't be performing. You'll just be standing there while Reba tells your story. Our story. Think about how many people that could reach. People who might be inspired to help other farmers, or farmers who need to know they're not alone." Rebecca sided with Emily. "Will, you stood up in front of that community meeting and asked for help when it was the hardest thing you'd ever done. This is no different, and it's for Reba, who saved our home. We owe her this." So on a warm Saturday evening, the Carmichael family found themselves backstage at the Grand Ole Opry. The historic venue was buzzing with energy, and Will felt completely out of place among the seasoned performers and industry professionals. Reba found them in the green room and immediately put them at ease. "Don't be nervous. You're just going to stand there and look like the wonderful people you are. I'll do all the talking." When her time came, Reba took the stage to thunderous applause. She performed several of her classic songs, her powerful voice filling the historic venue. Then, about halfway through her set, she paused. "I want to take a moment to tell you about some friends of mine," she said, her voice softening. "A few months ago, I heard about a family in Greenfield, Tennessee, who were about to lose their farm. A farm that had been in their family for 3 generations because of a banking error. This wasn't about bad business decisions or poor planning. This was about good, hard-working people being crushed by a system that had failed them." She gestured to the wings. "Will, Rebecca, Emily, would you come out here, please?" The Carmichaels walked onto the Grand Ole Opry stage to warm applause. The lights were bright, and Will could barely make out the sea of faces in the audience, but he could feel the energy of the crowd. Reba put her arm around Rebecca. "These folks represent something that's disappearing from America. Family farms run by people who care about the land, care about their community, and care about doing things right. When I visited their farm, I saw my own family's history reflected in theirs, and I knew I had to help." She turned to face them. But here's what's really special about this story. What started as one family's fight to save their farm became a movement. Their daughter Emily started an organization that's now helping farmers all across the country. They took their struggle and turned it into hope for others. The audience erupted in applause. Will felt Rebecca squeeze his hand, and he saw tears streaming down Emily's face. Reba spoke directly to the audience now. "We talk a lot about the American dream, but we don't always talk about the American reality for folks like the Carmichaels. Small farmers are disappearing. Family businesses are being swallowed by corporations. Communities are losing their identity. But stories like this one remind us that when people come together, when they refuse to give up, when they support each other, miracles can happen." She picked up her guitar. "I'd like to dedicate this next song to Will, Rebecca, and Emily, and to all the farmers out there who keep working the land, no matter how hard it gets. This is the greatest man I never knew." As Reba sang, the Carmichaels stood at the side of the stage, watching her perform. The song, about a daughter's relationship with her father, resonated deeply. Emily looked at Will, seeing the emotion on his face, and understood that this moment, standing on this historic stage, being honored for their perseverance, was validation of everything he'd worked for his entire life. When the song ended, Reba hugged each of them before they left the stage. The standing ovation followed them into the wings. The Opry appearance brought another wave of media attention, but this time, the Carmichaels were better prepared. Emily had developed talking points about agricultural policy, the importance of protecting family farms, and the need for banking reform. Will and Rebecca did fewer interviews, preferring to let Emily be the spokesperson, but when they did speak, their authentic voices resonated with people. In June, Emily received an invitation to speak at a congressional hearing on agricultural debt and banking practices. She was terrified, but accepted. In a committee room in Washington, D.C., Archie told their story to lawmakers, emphasizing that her family had been lucky. They'd had community support, media attention, and ultimately, a generous benefactor. But what about the thousands of farm families who didn't have those advantages? "My father nearly lost everything because of a paperwork error," she testified. "How many families have already lost their land to similar situations? How many are fighting right now with no hope of success? We need systemic change, not just individual acts of charity." Several representatives thanked her for her testimony and promised to look into reforming agricultural lending practices. Whether anything would come of it remained to be seen. But Emily had planted seeds, just like her father had taught her. By summer, life on the Carmichael farm had found a new rhythm. Will still worked the land every day, but now he also hosted monthly meetings of the local farmers' cooperative. The bulk purchasing program David Park had proposed was saving members an average of 15% on supplies, and they'd started a mentorship program pairing experienced farmers with younger ones just starting out. Rebecca had become involved with the church's outreach program, organizing food donations from local farms to food banks across the region. Her illness was stable, and having a purpose beyond just managing her symptoms had improved her quality of life significantly. Emily split her time between coordinating the Farmers Helping Farmers Network and teaching online classes about agricultural advocacy and community organizing. She'd been approached by several universities about developing a curriculum around these topics. One July evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Will reflected on how much had changed. "You know what I think about sometimes?" he said to Rebecca. "What if we just given up? What if we'd said, 'The bank wins, we lose, that's just how it is'?" Rebecca rocked gently in her chair. "But that's not who you are, Will. That's not who any of us are. We're fighters. We're survivors," Emily added, joining them with 3 glasses of iced tea. "And now we're helping other people survive too." A car pulled into the driveway. The Davidsons, bringing their kids for a promised farm tour. Keith had called earlier, excited to show his children what a thriving family farm looked like, and to thank the Carmichaels in person once again. As Will watched the Davidson kids run toward the barn, their laughter echoing across the property, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. This farm would continue. The legacy his grandfather had built would pass to future generations. And beyond his own family, he and Rebecca and Emily were part of something larger, a network of people committed to preserving a way of life that mattered. In September, the Carmichael farm celebrated its 75th anniversary. The community organized a festival on the property, with local vendors, live music, and activities for children. Over 1,000 people attended throughout the day. A local artist had created a mural depicting the history of the farm, from Will's grandfather breaking ground in 1947 to the present day. The final panel showed Will, Rebecca, and Emily standing together in front of the farmhouse, but behind them were shadowy figures representing all the other families they'd helped, a visual representation of the ripple effect Reba had talked about. Reba couldn't attend due to touring commitments, but she sent a video message that was played on a big screen set up in the field. To the Carmichael family and the entire Greenfield community, you've shown the world what's possible when people refuse to give up and when they lift each other up. This anniversary isn't just about celebrating 75 years of one farm. It's about celebrating the spirit of perseverance, community, and hope that this farm represents. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep helping others. Keep being the light. The crowd cheered, and Emily found herself fighting back tears yet again. She'd cried more in the past 9 months than in her entire previous life. But they were good tears. Tears of gratitude, joy, and hope. Charlie McKenzie took the microphone as the sun began to set. "I think we all know that this past year hasn't just been about saving one farm. It's been about remembering what we stand for as a community. In a world that sometimes feels too big, too complicated, too indifferent, we've proven that small-town values still matter, that neighbors still look out for neighbors, that one person's generosity can change everything." He raised his glass. "To the Carmichael farm, 75 years strong and counting, and to all of us, committed to making sure it stands for 75 more. To the Carmichael farm," the crowd echoed. As autumn arrived and harvest season began, Will found himself reflecting on the full circle his life had made. He'd started as a young man learning from his grandfather, working this same soil, learning these same lessons about patience, perseverance, and the cycles of nature. He'd raised his daughter here, watched her grow into a woman who understood the value of roots and community. He'd nearly lost it all, and in that near loss, had discovered depths of love and support he'd never fully appreciated. The harvest was good that year, the best in a decade. The weather had cooperated. The cooperative's bulk-purchased supplies had proven their worth. And Will's years of experience had guided him through the challenges that inevitably arose. On the first day of October, exactly 1 year after receiving the letter from the bank, Will stood in the same spot where he'd stood that terrible morning. But everything was different now. The cornfield was ready for harvest, golden and abundant. The farmhouse behind him was secure, truly theirs with no shadow of debt hanging over it. And most importantly, his family was healthy, happy, and together. Emily joined him, her camera in hand. She'd been documenting the anniversary year, planning to create a photo book as a gift for her parents. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" she asked, snapping a few shots of him against the backdrop of the corn. "About endings and beginnings," he said. "A year ago, I thought we were facing the end of everything. Turns out, we were facing a beginning. A beginning of what? Of understanding what really matters. Of learning to ask for help. Of realizing that our story isn't just ours, it's connected to everyone else's story. Your grandfather used to say that a farm is about more than crops. It's about cultivating relationships with the land, with the community, with the future. I understood that intellectually, but I didn't really get it until this year." Emily lowered her camera. "You know what the best part is? Years from now, when I have kids and they ask about their family history, I won't just tell them about great-great-grandfather Henry building this place, or about you maintaining it all these years. I'll tell them about the community that rallied around us, about a country music legend who saw our story and cared, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. That's the legacy that matters most." Will pulled his daughter into a hug. "You're going to make a great teacher of history, Em, because you understand that history isn't just dates and facts. It's stories about real people facing real challenges and finding ways to overcome them." In November, the Carmichael family received one more surprise. A package arrived from Nashville with a return address they recognized: Reba's management office. Inside was a framed gold record with a plaque that read, "To Will, Rebecca, and Emily Carmichael, for reminding us all what really matters. With love and respect, Reba." Along with it was a handwritten letter. "Dear Carmichael family, I've been following your journey over this past year with such joy and pride. What started as a simple gesture of helping a family in need has become something so much bigger. The ripples keep spreading, and that's exactly how it should be. I want you to know that you've inspired me as much as I might have helped you. Seeing how you've used your experience to help others, how you've built networks of support, and how you've stayed humble and grateful through it all. That's the real success story. This gold record represents one of my favorite songs. But I want you to have it as a reminder that you've written your own song this year. A song about resilience, community, and hope. Keep singing it. Keep sharing it. Keep making a difference. With much love, Reba." Rebecca hung the gold record in the living room, right next to the photos of Will's grandfather and the family history that lined the walls. It fit perfectly. A modern chapter in a long story of hard work, dedication, and love. On Christmas morning, 1 year after Reba's phone call that had brought tears of joy, the Carmichaels once again gathered in their living room. This time, they'd invited the Davidsons to join them, along with Charlie McKenzie and his wife, and George Hammond. The house was full of laughter, good food, and the kind of warmth that comes from being surrounded by people who have weathered storms together. The children played in the living room. George told stories from the old days, and the adults discussed plans for the farmers' cooperative in the coming year. As Will looked around the room, seeing all these lives interconnected, he understood something profound. The farm had been saved, yes, but more importantly, they'd all been changed by the experience. They'd learned about vulnerability and strength, about community and compassion, about the power of small acts to create large impacts. Rebecca caught his eye from across the room and smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart 4 decades ago. Emily was showing the Davidson kids photos from the farm's 75th anniversary celebration. Charlie and George were debating the best way to irrigate cornfields. Life was happening, continuing, thriving. That evening, after their guests had left, and Emily had driven back to her apartment in town, Will and Rebecca stood on the porch one last time before heading to bed. The December air was cold, and stars filled the clear night sky. "Quite a year," Rebecca said softly. "Quite a year," Will agreed. "Almost lost everything. Instead, gained more than I knew existed. What do you think next year will bring?" Will pulled her close, both of them looking out at the land that had defined their lives, challenged them, and ultimately brought them to this moment of peace and gratitude. "I think next year will bring whatever it brings, but I know we'll face it together, with our family, our community, and the lessons we've learned. And I know this farm will still be here, still growing food, still providing a home for the people we love." Rebecca leaned into him. "That sounds perfect." They stood there for a few more minutes. Two people who had come so close to losing everything and had discovered that what truly mattered couldn't be taken away by a bank or a piece of paper. It lived in their hearts, in their relationships, in the legacy of kindness and resilience they were building one day at a time. As they finally went inside, Will took one last look at the farm. In the moonlight, it looked peaceful and eternal, as if it had always been there and always would be. And thanks to the extraordinary chain of events that had unfolded over the past year, a chain that had started with a terrible letter and ended with renewed hope, that was now true. The Carmichael farm would continue. The story would go on. And somewhere out there, other families facing their own struggles might hear about what happened here and find the courage to keep fighting for what they loved. That, Will thought as he closed the door behind him, was the real miracle. Not just one farm saved, but a reminder to everyone who heard the story that giving up was never the only option, that community mattered, and that sometimes, just sometimes, angels showed up in the most unexpected ways to remind us of our own strength. The light in the farmhouse went out, but the hope it represented burned brighter than ever, a beacon for anyone who needed to believe that better days were possible.